stood up and pointed his gun at the captain. Both Karl and the captain were too late. I am getting old, Karl thought. When I was young, I could move as fast as Harold, but not now. Karl sat down in his seat very slowly. The bearded man watched him all the time. He pushed Harold with his foot. "Search him," he said to the girl. "Then handcuff him to the door. He will be the next one." The girl pulled Harold to the door. She found some handcuffs in his pocket and handcuffed him to the door. Then she searched his other pockets. In one of his pockets she found a newspaper. She looked at it and saw the photo of Harold and Karl. She stood up slowly and showed it to the bearded man. He looked at the photo, and then he looked at Karl carefully and for a long time. Very slowly, smiles appeared on the faces of the two hijackers, and they began to laugh. Chapter 9. Helen Sandberg stood up to welcome the American and British ambassadors. The two men were very different. The American ambassador was a short, round man with a loud voice which Helen disliked very much. He often wore open-necked shirts, and he had a very hairy chest. She disliked that too. The British ambassador, a tall, thin Scotsman from Edinburgh, was always quiet, polite and well-dressed, but she did not always believe what he said. Once, a year ago, he had lied to her, and she could never forget that. But most of all, she disliked them because they were both military men, and their countries were much bigger than hers. They wanted military bases for their soldiers in her country, and she did not want them. "So, gentlemen, what can I do for you?" The American spoke first. "Well, ma'am, an American passenger is dead." "Yes, I know. I am very sorry about that. I hope no more will die." "I hope so too, ma'am. There are 28 U.S. passengers on that plane, and my government wants to keep them alive." "There are 107 passengers on that plane, Ambassador, and my government wants them all alive," Helen answered quietly. But the ambassador did not listen. "So the U.S. government is going to help you, ma'am. We have 50 U.S. Marines at the U.S. Embassy, and they can be here in 1 hour from now. Then they'll just take that goddamn plane apart." The Scotsman smiled. "Excuse me, Ambassador, but perhaps 1 hour from now will be too late. One man is already dead. But, perhaps you don't know this, Prime Minister, but this week 6 SAS soldiers are visiting the British Embassy, and they're waiting outside in my car now. These men know a lot about hijacks, much more than the U.S. Marines, or probably your own soldiers, Prime Minister. They know exactly what to do. So—" "Now, just a moment," the American interrupted. "The U.S. Marines are—" "Gentlemen!" Helen's clear, hard voice stopped them. "There's no time to argue. Firstly, I didn't know about the SAS soldiers in the British Embassy, and I am very surprised about it. Very surprised indeed, Ambassador. Secondly, I do not think it is a good idea to attack a plane with 107 passengers in it and take it apart, as you say. I want these people to live, not die. So I thank you for your ideas. But remember that this small country is ours, not yours. We will manage this problem in our own way with our own people. Thank you very much. Now you must excuse me. I am busy." At the door, the Scotsman turned back. "Prime Minister, I know you want to save lives," he said. "I understand that. But these hijackers must not go free. My government does not want that. No government in the world wants that." "I know that, Ambassador," Helen answered quietly. "I know that very well." As they went out, the phone rang. Michael picked it up. Helen sat down at the table and watched him. His face was very serious. He wrote on a piece of paper and then put the phone down. For a moment he did not look at her. "What is it, Michael? Tell me." "It was a radio message from the plane, Prime Minister." "Well, what did they say? Didn't they want to talk to me?" "No, Prime Minister. Just the message. It says, 'We love our brothers. We hope the Prime Minister loves her husband. He is on the plane, just behind the door.'" For a long moment she stared at Michael, but she did not speak. A picture of the American passenger appeared in her head. She saw him jumping out of the door, and the girl shooting him for 10, maybe 15 long seconds. "I'm sorry, Prime Minister," said Michael softly. "What?" "Yes, so am I. I thought perhaps the hijackers didn't know Carl was my husband. But now they do know." She ran her hand through her hair and then looked at her watch. But her hand was shaking so much that she could not tell the time. The phone rang again. Michael picked it up. "Colonel Carter is outside, Prime Minister." He watched her, waiting for an answer. "I'll tell him to wait, shall I?" She put her hands flat on the table and stood up. Yes, Michael. Tell him to wait 2 minutes, that's all." She walked to the window and stared out at the plane. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, and for 2 minutes she did not move. Then she turned round and smiled at Michael. "Let's just hope Colonel Carter's plan is a good one, shall we? Show him in." Chapter 10. In the plane, Carl and Harold sat on the floor by the door. They were handcuffed together with Harold's handcuffs. The girl hijacker stood watching them with her gun. The bearded man was in the captain's cabin, and the young man in the black shirt was watching the other passengers. Harold touched his head with his hand. There was blood in his hair. "How do you feel, my young friend?" Carl asked. "It hurts," Harold answered. "And I can't see well." "This man needs a doctor," Carl said to the girl angrily. She laughed. "That's your wife's problem, not mine," she said. "If our brothers come, he will get a doctor. If they don't come, he won't need one." She pointed her gun at Harold's head and laughed again. She wasn't at all nervous now. Carl felt angry. He was angry with the hijackers, and he was angry with himself, because he had not moved fast enough to help Harold. It was good to be angry. When he was angry, he did not feel so afraid. "How old are you?" he asked the girl. She did not answer. "I asked you a question," he said. "How old are you? 18, 19? You're not very old, really, are you? You're just a child." The girl's face went red. "I'm 20, she said angrily. "I'm not a child." "You look like a child," Carl said. "You're only 2 years older than my daughter. Why are you doing this?" The girl laughed. She didn't look at his eyes. "Why? You wouldn't understand." "I don't think you understand what you're doing," Carl said. "None of the people in this plane has hurt you. We are all innocent. That man you killed, he wasn't a spy. He was just an American businessman. You've never seen any of us before. Why do you want to kill us?" The girl looked worried and angry. She pointed the gun straight at Carl's head. "I don't want to kill you," she said. "I want your government, your wife, to set our brothers free." "Yes, I know," said Carl carefully. He watched the gun and the girl's face, but he was not really afraid because he was still angry. He argued with the girl as though he was arguing with his daughter. "But remember what your brothers did. They tried to put a bomb on a plane. They wanted to kill innocent people like us. Why?" "You are not innocent," said the girl. "No one is innocent. People like you and your wife and that American. You have money and power, and you take it from my people, from us. Do you know how I lived when I was a child? 10 people in one room, with no bath, no water, nothing. My parents had no jobs, no passports, no country, nothing. We lived in a town with 10,000 others, but 10 kilometres away there were rich people like you, with big, beautiful houses, fine cars, fine clothes, and they were all innocent people like you. I tell you, no one is innocent." She was shouting now, and nearly crying. There were tears in her eyes. Carl and Harold watched the gun carefully. Poor girl, Carl thought. Poor little murderess. The bearded man came out of the captain's cabin and put his hand on the girl's arm. "Stop it, little flower," he said. "Don't talk to them. That's not your job." Then he hit Carl in the face. "Keep your mouth shut," he said. "Think about your wife instead. Do you see the time? I think she has forgotten you." Carl groaned and held his mouth with his hand. There was blood in his mouth, and one of his teeth was broken. Then he looked at his watch. It was 2:23. 7 minutes left. Then the half-hour was over. "I'm sorry, my friend," he whispered to Harold. "You tried fighting, and I tried talking. But it didn't work. I think this may be our last journey." Chapter 11. Helen Sandberg decided she liked Colonel Carter. He spoke clearly, he explained his ideas carefully, and he listened to what she said. He did not try to be difficult because she was a woman. Best of all, they had made a plan together. A good plan, she thought. It could really work. Perhaps. She looked at her watch. 2:23. "Right, Colonel. Get your men ready. I'll send the first prisoner down to you when they arrive." "But where are they? Michael, have they arrived yet?" "No, Prime Minister. Not yet." "Then where the hell are they? Can you get Inspector home on the car radio?" "They're trying, Prime Minister." Michael spoke into the telephone. Colonel Carter left the room, and Helen walked up and down slowly, watching the clock. 2:24, 2:25, 2:26. "They've got him, Prime Minister. He says one of the cars has had an accident in the rain. He thinks he can be here in 10 minutes. Michael looked up. There was no smile on his face at all now. 10 minutes? What's he driving, a police car or a bicycle? Helen banged her fist on the table. We've got 4 minutes left. OK. I want to talk to the hijackers. Get them on the radio. She sat down at the table while Michael called the plane. Colonel Carter came in and stood behind her. A voice came on the radio. "Well, Mrs. Sandberg, where are our brothers?" "They're coming," said Helen. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. "That is too late. I gave you half an hour. Your husband will die in 4 minutes. Helen pressed her hands flat on the table, so hard that the ends of her fingers went white. "Please don't do that," she said. "I am sorry, Mrs. Sandberg, but if my brothers are not here in 4 minutes, your husband will die." "Don't you want to see your brothers?" she asked quickly. "I promise you, if you kill my husband, you'll never see them again." There was a pause while no one spoke. Then the radio answered. 4 minutes, Mrs. Sandberg." Helen spoke clearly, slowly, and loudly. She filled her voice with all the anger she had in her body. "Listen, you murderer. I need just 10 minutes to get your brothers to this airport. Then I will send them to the plane. But if you kill my husband or anyone else, then I promise you that your brothers will die on the tarmac in front of that plane. Is that what you want? Or will you wait 10 minutes? There was another longer pause. Helen stared out into the night. She did not see anything. "All right. 10 more minutes. Thank you. Now there is one more thing. The passengers. What about them?" "You must set them free before I send your brothers to the plane." The voice on the radio laughed. "Because you are a woman. Do you think all men are stupid like your husband? Send me our brothers, then refuel the plane, and then I will send you the passengers." "No," answered Helen. She looked at Colonel Carter. "This is how we will do it. I will send you one of your brothers, and then you must send me the passengers. When we have all the passengers, then we will refuel the plane and send you your other brother." The voice laughed again. "Do you think you are buying cheap fish from a child in the market? Send us one brother, then, and we will send you 100 passengers. Refuel the plane and send us the other brother, and we will send you the other passengers. But the pilot and your husband must come with us to another country. We will set them free later." Helen looked at Colonel Carter. There was the beginning of a smile on her face. She could see that he agreed with her. She waited for a moment longer to worry the hijacker. "Is it agreed, woman? Or do I kill your husband now?" "I agree. I will send your first brother to you in 10 minutes. Chapter 12. Carl felt his broken tooth with his tongue. The door of the captain's cabin was open, and he could see the bearded hijacker sitting inside. He had a long nose and dark hair, and his eyes looked green from the light of the instruments in the dark cabin. He held his gun near his mouth, and touched it gently with his lips as he waited. Carl had heard half of the conversation. 8 of the 10 minutes had gone. Now that he could do nothing, he felt afraid. He could feel his hand in the handcuffs shaking. Harold felt it too, and held Carl's hand with his own. "Don't worry, Mr. Sandberg," Harold whispered. "We'll get out of here." "Perhaps," Carl answered. "And perhaps not. But I don't want these murderers to go free." "Shh," Harold whispered. Carl looked up and saw the girl watching them. Then suddenly the bearded man shouted, "They're coming! Look! Get ready!" The girl went into the captain's cabin. Harold and Carl stood up and looked through a window. They saw 3 men pushing some steps across the tarmac. The men put the steps outside the plane door and then went back again. Then 2 more men came out of the building. They were wearing bright yellow coats because of the rain. One man walked towards the plane. "Come away from the door, quick!" The girl unlocked the handcuffs and pushed Harold and Carl back to their seats. Then she started to open the door. "Wait! Turn the lights out and stand back from the door," said the bearded man. "They will try to shoot us in the light from the door." The door opened and the man in the yellow coat came into the plane. He was thin, with very short hair. The girl shut the door, the lights came on, and the man shut his eyes in the bright light. The girl and the bearded man put their arms around him, laughing. "Free! You are free now, brother. And the other one, is he safe? Come into the cabin, let's talk." Carl and Harold watched sadly. "So now she will give them what they want, because of me," said Carl quietly. "We will be safe, but they will go free to bomb another plane, because of me." He held his head in his hands. "Wait, Mr. Sandberg," said Harold. "Your wife isn't stupid, you know. This game has not ended yet. Sit still and be ready." The other passengers sat quietly, waiting to be free. Chapter 13. Helen Sandberg stood by the control room window staring at the plane. "Come on," she said. "Why is that door shut? Where are the passengers?" "The hijackers won't set them free," said Inspector Home. "I told you, Prime Minister. This is a serious mistake." "Be quiet, man," said Colonel Carter. "I think we've got something on the radio." Beside him, a soldier was turning the controls of a small army radio. Suddenly, the voices of one of the hijackers and the prisoner came into the room. "So, how many soldiers are there in the airport building, my brother?" "I didn't see any soldiers, only police." "That's strange. No soldiers at all?" "I did not see any, brother." "Very strange. But these are not military people. They do not have many soldiers. Perhaps the woman will do what she says then." "What's happening, Colonel?" Helen asked. "Those are the hijackers' voices. How can we hear them?" The Colonel laughed. "Well, madam, you can see it's raining, can't you? We didn't want our poor prisoner to get wet, so we gave him a nice yellow raincoat, you see. But it was an expensive raincoat, because one of its buttons is a small radio transmitter, so now we can hear everything they say, and we know where they are on the plane." Helen smiled. "Good idea, Colonel. I hope it helps." "Prime Minister," Michael interrupted. "They're coming." Helen looked through the window. The door of the plane was open, and people were coming down the steps one after another. Some of them started to run towards the airport building, and a few knelt down on the wet tarmac. "What are they doing?" Helen asked. "Praying, perhaps," said Michael. "To thank God that they're alive." Police and doctors came out of the building to help the passengers. Helen stood and watched through the binoculars. She did not see Carl. 99, 100. "That's it, then," said Colonel Carter. The plane door closed. "Now we move on to the next step of our plan. Goodbye, Prime Minister." Helen turned and saw that the Colonel was putting on white clothes on top of his army uniform. He put several grenades in the coat pocket and a machine gun into a long pocket inside the coat. He smiled at her. "I must help my men refuel the plane." "May God go with you, Colonel," she said. Chapter 14. The lights in the plane went out again. There were only 11 of them left now. Carl Sandberg and Harold, 4 crew and 5 Americans. They sat together in the middle of the plane. The girl and the young man in the black shirt watched them. Through the window, Carl saw the fuel tanker drive towards the plane. It stopped, and 5 men in white clothes got out. The pilot went to the front of the plane to work the controls, and the men started to refuel the plane. Then he saw another man in a yellow raincoat come out of the airport building. The bearded hijacker started to talk very excitedly. "Is it him?" "Yes, it is. Our leader. My brother and sister, we have done it. Now I must welcome him at the door. You, brother, watch the pilot in the cabin, and sister, watch the passengers." Carl Sandburg watched the man in the yellow coat walk nearer. He could only see one man at the back of the plane refueling it. He thought the others were under the plane somewhere, but he did not know where. Harold put his hand on Carl's arm. Carl looked at him. Harold did not speak, but he was looking at the girl very carefully. As the door opened and the man with the yellow coat came in, the girl turned to look. Through the window, Carl saw a man in a white coat run out from under the plane with something that looked like a grenade in his hand. 2 other men in white ran out behind him. The man's arm went up, and he threw the grenade through the open door. There was a very loud bang at the front of the plane and a flash of white light that burnt Carl's eyes. Almost immediately, there was an even louder bang, bang, and 2 more flashes of white light. Carl could not move. The noise was so loud and the light so bright that he sat still as a stone. He saw the girl hijacker and the bearded man standing quite still too, with their guns in their hands and their mouths open. Then a man in white ran through the door with a gun in his hand. He shot the girl and the bearded man before they could move. The hijacker in the black shirt came out of the captain's cabin behind the man in white, but 2 other men in white came through the door and shot him too. The 2 prisoners in their yellow raincoats tried to get to the door, but the men in white knocked them to the floor and handcuffed their hands behind their backs. Carl looked down. The girl was lying on the floor of the aisle beside him. He thought he saw her hand move towards her machine gun, but then one of the soldiers in white ran down the aisle and shot her again through the head. Another soldier pulled her away by her legs, and her long hair left blood along the floor. Chapter 15. Helen Sandburg heard the bangs too, and when she saw the white light, she thought the plane was burning. For about half a minute there was nothing but loud bangs and white flashes, and then there was nothing. There were no lights at all in the plane, and no sounds either. She turned to Michael. "Can't you get them on the radio?" "I'm trying, Prime Minister, but I think it's broken." She walked to the door. "I'm going out." Inspector Holmes stood in front of her. "You must not do that, Prime Minister. We don't know what's happened." "That's why I'm going," she said. "I'm going to find out. I don't care what happens to me." He was a big man, but he was afraid of her. She walked straight past him and down the steps. In the departure lounge there was a crowd of passengers waiting to get on other planes, and also a lot of doctors, police, and newspaper journalists. She walked straight past them all and out onto the tarmac. It was dark and cold, and the wind blew rain into her face. When she was about 50 meters away from the building, she heard some people behind her, but she did not stop. The door of the plane opened, and a man in white came out. He had a gun in his hand, and he came backwards down the steps. After him came 2 men in yellow raincoats, with their hands behind their backs, and then 2 other men in white with guns. 2 police officers came after her. "Wait, Prime Minister," they said. Please stop, it's dangerous." "Not now," she said. "It's not dangerous any more." She walked on through the rain without stopping, and the young police officers walked beside her. They were afraid to touch her, and they did not know what to do. Some journalists ran after them. 2 men in blue came out of the plane, the pilot and co-pilot. Then some men in suits. She was quite near the plane now, and there were quite a lot of newspaper photographers around her, but she did not stop walking. A big young man came out of the plane with a short, thin, grey-haired one. Harold and Carl. Helen could see that Carl's face was very white, and there was blood on his mouth, but he could walk all right. Carl saw her coming, a small, strong figure walking through the rain, with a crowd of police and photographers around her. "Harold, my friend," he said, "I think we're in the news again. You're going to have another photo to show your little son on his birthday." Carl and Helen Sandberg met at the bottom of the steps, in the darkness and the rain. And Carl was right. There was a photo of it in every newspaper in the world the next day.